Are you waking up 3, 4, 5 times a night just to make that walk down the hallway? Does the first trip come before midnight, and does it feel like your bladder was never really full to begin with, just full enough to drag you out of bed again? I'm 83 now, and I asked myself those exact questions for 6 straight years before I got an answer that actually made sense. Most men in that spot assume it's their bladder simply giving out with age, but in most cases the bladder itself tests completely healthy. I found that out the hard way, after years of blaming an organ that turned out to be innocent the whole time. Most nights now, I get up once, sometimes not at all. 6 years ago, 5 trips a night was my normal, and I genuinely believed that was just what happened to a man's body this far into life. I'm 83, and these days I sleep through most nights without leaving the bed more than once. I empty in one trip when I do get up, no waiting, no half-finished business. My nights belong to me again. You'd think a bladder that wakes a man 5 times a night is simply worn thin from decades of use, the way anything mechanical eventually gives out. But here's what didn't add up when I finally asked the right question. My bladder, on every test they ran, was structurally sound. It wasn't failing. It was being squeezed from one side and never allowed to finish its job on the other. 2 separate problems working together that nobody had ever laid out for me in plain language. For 6 years, my nights ran the same painful loop. Lights out by 9:30, awake by midnight, feet on a cold floor, walking a hallway I could navigate blind. A weak stream that took its time starting, then trickled rather than flowed. Back to bed, only to be up again 40 minutes later, because whatever I'd released wasn't the whole story. The bladder had already begun refilling with what never came out the first time. A 3rd trip past 1, a 4th closer to 3. By the time the sun came up, I felt like I'd run an actual marathon, except the only thing I had to show for it was exhaustion and a wife who watched me shuffle past the bedroom door more times than either of us wanted to count. I stopped volunteering for early mornings with my grandsons. I turned down a hunting trip with old friends because I couldn't picture surviving 2 nights in a cabin with 1 bathroom and 3 other men watching me get up over and over. There's a shame in that nobody talks about. A man who built a career and raised a family, reduced to gripping a hallway wall at 2 in the morning, waiting on a body that won't cooperate. My wife started keeping a small light plugged in along the hallway, just so I wouldn't stumble in the dark. Neither of us said much about why it was there. We both knew, and neither of us wanted to make it bigger by talking about it out loud. That silence became its own kind of weight, carrying something together without ever actually setting it down between us. My doctor, when I finally brought it up, nodded the way doctors do when they've heard this 1,000 times, mentioned an enlarged prostate, and left it there. 8 minutes, a nod, next patient. He wasn't wrong, he just never had the time to explain the mechanism, the actual why behind the 5 trips, not just the label. What my neighbor Ray finally laid out for me over the fence one Saturday morning, while I was pretending to fix a sprinkler head just to have an excuse to keep talking, is that an enlarged prostate causes 2 separate problems, not 1. Ray spent 30 years as an ER nurse before he retired, and he'd heard some version of my exact complaint from 100 men over the years. First, it physically squeezes the tube carrying urine out of the body, which is why the stream weakens, takes longer to start, and trickles instead of flowing with force. Second, and this is the part almost nobody explains, because the flow is restricted, the bladder rarely gets the chance to empty all the way in one sitting. What's left behind refills the tank faster than it should, so the bladder reaches full again in roughly an hour instead of the 3 or 4 hours a healthy bladder should give you. Squeeze the pipe and leave residue behind, and you've built the exact machine that wakes a man up 5 times a night. Ray told me something that reframed the whole thing. He said most of the men he'd dealt with in the ER, and plenty of his own friends besides, assumed there was one villain in this story, and they were always surprised to learn there are 2 mechanisms stacking on top of each other, one mechanical, from the prostate itself, and one behavioral, from a bladder that's never been taught to fully empty. The prostate is tissue. You can support it, but you can't talk a gland into shrinking overnight. The emptying piece, though, is something you can train, starting tonight, with no prescription required. Ray also explained why doctors rarely walk patients through this. It isn't neglect, it's math. A standard visit runs around 8 minutes. There's barely time to confirm the prostate diagnosis and adjust a medication, let alone teach a technique that takes a few minutes to demonstrate properly. He'd watched it happen from the other side of the clipboard for 3 decades. The system just hasn't given anyone the time to show you. It also isn't something you can look up once and immediately get right. Like anything physical, it takes a little practice to feel the difference between rushing through a bathroom trip out of habit and actually giving your body the extra moment it needs to finish. I got it wrong the first several tries, standing there feeling a bit foolish, unsure if anything was actually happening. That's normal. It took me the better part of a week before I could reliably feel the second release. For 11 years, the bathroom ran my nights. Up at midnight, up at 2, up again at 5, a weak little stream each time and never quite empty. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, knowing I'd drag through the next day half awake. I thought it was just age. It wasn't. Here's what no one ever sat me down to explain. The prostate crowds the channel your urine runs through, so the bladder never fully drains. It just fills right back up within the hour. That's why you go and go again. It was never weakness. It was never getting old. And the pills they kept handing me, they left me dizzy every time I stood, gave me that strange, dry finish where almost nothing came, and the nights never changed. But there is a gentle way to help that bladder empty the way it's meant to, without any of that. At 83, I finally sleep through the night again. I'll show you exactly what in this video, and if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. The technique is called double voiding, paired with a short pelvic floor routine, and together they target the part of the problem that medication alone often can't reach, the incomplete emptying. Double voiding is simple. You go as usual, wait about 30 seconds, standing right there, relax, and then try again before you leave the bathroom. That second attempt often releases more than you'd expect, because the bladder gets a genuine second chance to finish what the first contraction missed. It's not a cure. It doesn't shrink anything. What it appears to do, based on what Ray explained over that fence and what I've read since, is close the gap between what you think you emptied and what's actually left behind. The exact gap that was refilling my bladder in under an hour. I paired it with 2 more habits, because one technique alone rarely turns around years of broken nights. First, the double voiding itself, every single bathroom trip, day and night, until it became automatic rather than something I had to remember. Second, a short pelvic floor exercise most mornings, a few minutes of focused tightening and releasing, still lying in bed, which supports the muscles that actually help push urine out rather than just holding it in. Third, cutting caffeine and alcohol in the evening, since both irritate the bladder independently and make the incomplete emptying problem feel worse than it already is. 3 parts, all pulling the same direction, none of them costing a cent. I won't pretend the first week felt natural. Standing there in the bathroom, waiting 30 seconds on purpose, trying a second time when every instinct said I was done, it felt almost silly, like I was overthinking something my body should just handle on its own. But by the second week, it had stopped feeling deliberate at all. It just became part of how I used the bathroom, the same way washing your hands afterward is part of it, and you never think twice. I'm 83, and I sleep in the same bed as my wife of 51 years, most nights now without leaving it more than once before sunrise. I took that hunting trip I'd turned down for 3 years running, and I didn't think about the bathroom situation once. I sit through a full church service without doing the math on the nearest exit. That's not nothing. That's my whole sense of control handed back to me. I think about a man named Verlin, 77, who found this after his neighbor mentioned it over the fence. Verlin had been up 5 times a night for close to 9 years and had quietly accepted it as the price of getting old. He started the double voiding and the pelvic floor routine, stuck with it about 5 weeks, and told his neighbor he'd forgotten what a full night's sleep even felt like. I'm not sharing that as proof it works for every man. Bodies differ, and Verlin's doctor still checks his numbers regularly, same as mine does. I'm sharing it because it's the kind of quiet change that never makes headlines, but hands a man his nights back. Verlin told me something I still think about, that the hardest part wasn't learning the technique itself. It was believing something so simple could matter after years of assuming only a prescription or a procedure could touch it. That's the same wall I had to get past. We're conditioned to think real solutions have to be complicated or expensive. Sometimes the truth is just that nobody ever showed you the simple thing. None of what I'm describing replaces your doctor or whatever treatment you're already on. If you're taking medication for your prostate or your bladder, keep taking it. Keep your appointments and talk to your doctor before changing anything. This works alongside your care, never instead of it. What I'm telling you is that the piece almost nobody explains, the incomplete emptying that refills your bladder in under an hour, is something you can start addressing tonight, for free, without waiting on a prescription or an appointment 3 weeks out. So here's what I use: a few drops every single morning. And let me be honest about why it works. One herb on its own nudges one thing, but your prostate answers best when several signals are calmed at the same time: the flow, the emptying, the pressure behind it. That's why what I take brings them together, concentrated, working as one, not a single ingredient hoping to do everything. Stronger stream, full emptying, quiet nights, your freedom back. And none of the trade-offs, no dizziness, no dry finish, nothing taken from you as a man. It's linked right under this video. Go see it for yourself. It won't replace good sleep or your own doctor. It's there to support your body. At 83, I sleep through. It is not too late for you. What I want you to walk away with is this: 5 trips a night doesn't have to be your normal. And it isn't simply just age. I spent 6 years assuming my body had worn out, when really it had never been taught to finish the job. I think about the man I was, gripping a dark hallway wall at 2 in the morning, too tired to be angry and too proud to say how bad it had gotten. And I think about the man I am now, 83, sleeping through most nights, back on that hunting trip with old friends. That's dignity. That's independence. That's what I'd want for any man watching this who still thinks it's just his age. If you're getting up more times than you'd like, tell me in the comments how many. I read every one, and I want to know I'm not the only man who lived this. And if this changed how you see your own nights, subscribe, because there's more of what I've learned still coming.